Hey everyone, we are going to be making scones today. They're a great basic. They're made from very simple ingredients, so most of the time you've got pretty much everything you need in your cupboard already, so they're great to be making at home during this time. The first thing you're going to be doing is washing your hands, of course, which I've already done, and then next you're going to need to preheat your oven to 220 degrees Celsius fan forced. So mine's already preheating, which is great, and you want to make sure that you do that before you start cooking so that it's hot by the time you're ready to put your scones in the oven. And then you're going to want to start with a big bowl and 1 cup of self-raising flour. So I've already measured mine out, and I'm going to just put it straight into the bowl. And then we're going to get our butter, so 25 grams of butter, which I've already cut up as well. It's been sitting out for a little bit, so it's a little bit softer. It's not really soft, you don't want to melt it, but it is a bit softer, so it's going to be easier to work through your flour. And you're also going to want to add a pinch of salt. Now, a pinch is up to you. I don't like to add a ton, but just a little bit. Now, what you are going to be doing is you're going to be working with your hands. You don't want to be putting a spoon in. You want to be using your fingers to rub the butter into the flour. So just by using your fingertips, not the palms of your hands, you don't want to mush it, just your fingertips. And you're going to want to rub it into the flour. So the reason that we want to rub it in with our fingertips and not mix it in is because we want the butter to actually coat each of the flour grains, I guess you could say, because this means that when it gets into the oven, that butter will start to melt and it will create lift, and that will give you a nice fluffy scone. Whereas if you were to mix it in with a wooden spoon or even with an electric mixer, maybe you would beat out all that opportunity for air, so you'd still get a scone, it would just be a very dense scone. So you want to just keep working it until it looks like breadcrumbs is the aim. So very fine, no big chunks of butter. You want to make sure you get your fingers in, get all the way through, and get all those little bits of butter. You want to make sure you're doing it with your fingertips and not your palms, because your fingers are the coldest part of your hand, so they're not going to melt the butter before it even gets into the oven. You want it to stay actually as cold as possible, which is why we don't use melted butter. We want it to be cold so that it can coat the flour nicely. All right, so looks like that. No lumps, nice, soft, all the butter's mixed through. And we're going to wash our hands, and then we're going to continue on to the next step. Okay, so once you've washed your hands, you're then going to add in your flavourings. So there's a couple of options on our workbook recipes. You've got cheese and chives, sultanas, apricots, apple and cinnamon, but there's heaps of options. You could leave them plain if you wanted to, if you didn't want to add in any mixings. You could add in some fruit that you've got around the house, any dried fruit you could add in. You could be very creative with this option, sweet or savoury. You don't have to change anything about the base. It's just about the mixings that you add in. So I am going to be adding in chocolate today. That is because it is what I happen to have in the cupboard. So I'm going to add that straight in at this step so that our butter's rubbed in. We now add our ingredients, and using a butter knife, I'm just going to mix that through quickly. And then I'm going to create a well in the centre, so just a little kind of hole where the milk will sit, and I'm going to add in half a cup of milk straight into the centre. I'm also going to add in vanilla extract. Then you're going to start again using your butter knife, not a wooden spoon. It's very important that you use a butter knife at this step, and you're going to do what we call cutting through the dry and the wet ingredients. So that means taking your butter knife and scraping around the edge of your bowl and then cutting through the center. So kind of pulling the dry ingredients into the wet, and you're going to keep doing that until it's just combined. The reason that we use a butter knife, again, is the same thing. We don't want it to be overworked. So same thing as the butter and the flour. We want to leave as much air in our mixture as possible so that it gets nice and fluffy when it goes in the oven. So it'll come together quite quickly. Just keep cutting through the center. making sure you're getting all the dry bits from around the edge. It'll start to form into a dough on its own. You don't have to really do too much. Now, if your dough is a little bit dry, you can add a little bit more milk. Mine is actually a little bit wet, so I've got some extra flour here, which I'm just going to add in. And I'm going to keep mixing that in. Getting there, still a little bit wet. All right, so once our dough is ready and you think it's at the right texture, you're going to want to put a light bit of flouring on your bench or chopping board. Not too much, because again, if you put too much down, it'll dry out your dough. Mine is still a little bit sticky, so the bit of flour on the bench will help it. And we're going to pull all of that out. You don't want to leave anything behind. Alright, so now we've got our dough on our bench. Now, it is very important at this stage that you don't overwork the dough. So if you've seen people kneading bread before where they're really folding it and pushing it with their hand, you don't want to be doing that to your scone dough, because again, that is all just going to push the air out of it, and then it's not going to lift when it gets into the oven. So it'll be very dense, very flat, it won't rise nice and tall. So we're just going to make sure that on the bench, it's come together just very lightly, and then we're going to use our hands to press out our dough into the right thickness. Now for mine, I want to go just a few centimeters thick so that they're not massive, and you want to try and get it as even as you can across. Beautiful. Make sure it's not sticking to my bench. Okay. Then we're going to get our, I have a scone cutter because I make scones at home, but if you don't, you can do this with anything round. You could just cut around it with a knife, or you could freehand it with a knife if you wanted to. If you have different shaped cutters, maybe from Christmas or anything like that, you can use those. Go ahead, whatever you've got, it'll work. And then we're going to start cutting. Now, I like to dip my cutter in a little bit of flour first, make sure that it doesn't stick when you're pulling it out. And the next really important part about cutting out scones is you just want to push down. So just push, try and give it a little bit of a wriggle forward and backwards, side to side, and then pull up. Never twist it. So and I dip it into flour again, so when I go down into the dough, I'm never twisting it left and right. The reason for that, oh, that one's stuck a little bit. There you go, so it'll come out looking like that. The reason we don't twist it is because then when it starts to rise in the oven, the scone rises the way that the dough is shaped. So if you've twisted it and the sides of your scone have stuck to the inside of your cutter and they've pulled around, the scone will actually rise in a twist and it will turn over, and that's when you get those lopsided scones. Whereas if you just go up and down, the only direction the scone is going to go is up and down, and you're more likely to get a nice, even, straight up and down looking scone. So we're just going to use up the rest of our dough here. Again, it's okay to go a little bit to the left and a little bit to the right, just make sure you're going straight. All right. So when you've run out of space to cut out more, you can bring it back together. Again, you don't want to work it too much, just a little bit, just to bring it together. Flatten it out to about the same width as the others. Dip your cutter and go again, and you can keep going for as long as you want. I think I can get one more in the corner there. and you'll just keep going. So you bring it back together again and press it out. Okay, so once they're all cut out, you can put them on a lined baking tray, and then what we're going to do is we're going to glaze them, and this means that when they go into the oven, when they heat up, they're going to get that nice light brown kind of crispy coating on the top. And to do that, we're going to use a little bit of extra milk and a basting brush. Now, if you don't have a basting brush at home, you can do this with kind of just a little bit on a teaspoon and just rub it in, but a basting brush is best if you do have one. And we're going to do that just by getting a little bit on the brush, brushing it over the top. Doesn't have to be neat, it's just quick. Removed. And then now that they're basted, they can go in the oven for 10 to 12 minutes. So just keep an eye on them. Once they start to go a little bit brown on top, they're pretty much done. They should rise a lot and be nice and fluffy. Okay, so they are done. So you can see that they've got a nice browning on top. They've risen relatively vertically and they're going to taste great. So take them off, transfer them onto a wire rack, let them cool for a bit, and then dig in. Enjoy.